You guys often hear us talk about how important draft capital is for dynasty rookies. What round did that rookie go in? Does that really matter? I mean, if I like a quarterback, but he didn't go in the first round, should I really not draft him? Does it make a difference if a running back went in round 4 or 5? Like, does that really matter for me? Should I expect more Puka Nakuas coming out of round 5 in the future? Well, in today's video, we're going to dive into the last 10 years and find out just how important draft capital plays a role in top 12 and top 24 finishes in fantasy football. To quote Moneyball, we are counting cards at the blackjack table, trying to beat the system. I mean, not really. You get the idea. We're playing the percentages game. We're looking at top 12 finishes for every position. I'm going to dive deep with you guys, and we will see what percentage of players come from what rounds for each position. Let's start at the quarterback spot. Where do top 12 finishes come from for fantasy quarterbacks? Why top 12? Well, I say top 12 because in a 12-man league, which is standard, that is a quarterback one finish, a top 12 finish. So what I did is I looked at the last 10 years of top 12 finishes, and I tried to find out what round those players came from. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the last 5 years. You can see me highlighting the last 5 years. So in the last 5 years, 70% of quarterbacks who have finished in the top 12 have come from round 1. That's where we get this number here. 70% of quarterbacks who finish top 12 come from round 1. Oddly enough, round 4 actually has a higher percentage of top 12 finishes than round 2 at 10%, round 2 at 6.7%. You will often hear us on this channel talk about if a quarterback doesn't go in round 1, we're probably not taking a shot on that quarterback. I remember a couple drafts ago, people loved Hendon Hooker. They loved Sam Howell, for example. And for the most part, because those guys went later in the draft, Desmond Ridder add to that name, we were like, okay, we're probably going to pass on these guys for other positions in rookie drafts. But you can see here, again, in the last 5 years, 70% of top 12 finishes have come from round 1. Now, let's actually look at the last 10 years in totality in top 12 finishes. Well, in the last 10 years, 64% of quarterbacks who finished top 12 came from round 1. And again, round 4 still has more top 12 finishes than round 2. A lot of the reason why is because you have some outliers. You know, we talk about outliers. There's always a possibility for outliers in fantasy football. Well, Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott have been carrying round 4 for the last decade. In fact, Kirk Cousins has 7 years as a top 12 finish in fantasy coming out of round 4. Dak Prescott, 6 years in that same category. Now, there are always certain outliers. Round 5 has done terribly for the last 10 years outside of last year. Can you guys think of who last year was a top 12 finish in round 5? That was Sam Howell. Now, unfortunately, Sam Howell looks like he's out of a job. Maybe he gets traded, but round 5 is not a good bet. How about Brock Purdy being the only round 7 quarterback since 2014 to finish top 12? That is quite impressive for him. So in general, for the quarterback position, we commonly say if a guy isn't going to go in round 1, we're not really interested in super flex drafts. That doesn't mean that there won't be players who overcome those odds. But in the last 5 years, 70% of top 12 finishes come from round 1. In general, if you're in a super flex league and, let's say Michael Penix goes in round 2 and you want to start to take him over round 1 wide receivers and round 2 running backs, that is probably not a wise move. At least the last 10 years tell us that it's not a good bet. All right, let's move on to the running back position. Now, as we all know, the running back spot has changed a ton in the last 5 years in the NFL landscape. So looking at a 10-year scope will not make sense. So we're going to look at the last 5 years, but we're going to look at top 12 and top 24 finishes. Where do those players come from in the NFL draft? Why top 12 and top 24? Well, because top 12 in a 12-man league is your RB1s. Guys who finish as RB1s. Your top 24, those are the guys who finish as RB2s, the 24 best running backs in fantasy football. Most 12-man leagues have 2 starting running backs. There you get the term RB2. So why don't we look at the top 12 takeaways for the last 5 years? Well, we can see in the last 5 years, 33% of top 12 finishes have come from round 1 running backs. Okay? But I would say that round 2 is not far behind, with 28% of the finishes in the top 12 in the last 5 years. And I think that has more to do with the fact that running backs aren't typically drafted in round 1 rather than round 2 running backs being just as valuable. But we know this. It's not very common in the modern day NFL for running back to go round 1, even though we just saw elite talents like Bijan and Gibbs go in round 1 last year. But overwhelmingly, the running backs that are drafted in rounds 1 and 2, if you combine those two numbers, we get 37 out of 60 running backs who finished top 12 in the past 5 years. 61, almost 62% of those guys came from rounds 1 or rounds 2. Round 1 and round 2 running backs are really your best bet in fantasy football. Now, look, there are some outliers. Zach Charbonnet went to the Seahawks, and he's probably not going to be a top 12 guy anytime soon. But for the most part, those guys who go with that kind of commitment to a team, those are the guys who are your top 12 running backs. Whereas if we were to look at rounds 4 all the way to round 7, okay, rounds 4 to 7, only 15% of those running backs have had, in the last 5 years, top 12 finishes have only come from 15% of guys in rounds 4 to 7. Why don't we look at top 24 running backs? Okay. If we look at top 24 running backs, rounds 1 to 3 is absolutely dominant. Look at that, guys. Round 1, 26%. Round 2, 29%. And round 3, almost 23%. Rounds 1 to 3 for top 24 finishes account for 77.5% of those finishes. Just 22.5% of those finishes have come from players in rounds 4 to 7. And check this out. No running back in round 6 has finished top 12 in the past 5 years. We have not had a top 12 or a top 24 finish from a round 6 running back in the last 5 years ever. It just has not happened in that time span. No wonder Zach Evans didn't get a shot. No wonder. No, I'm kidding. All right, I've given up on Zach Evans. I hear you guys loud and clear. But there are always going to be outliers. And Aaron Jones, one of the best outliers of the past 5 years. He's been a top 12 running back 4 years in that span, even though he came out of round 4. Austin Eckler, the ultimate outlier at the running back position, undrafted free agent, a top 12 finish in 4 years of the last 5 years. So, question. Does it matter if I draft the running back in my rookie drafts if they're in round 4 or round 5? Does round 4 really make that much of a difference compared to round 5 for fantasy running backs? Well, it's not really that big of a difference when we look at top 24 players. Round 4 and 5, you guys can see here, there's only 2.5% difference in top 24 finishes amongst those 2 rounds. So no, it really does not make much difference. However, if a guy goes in round 6, you can pretty much consider him dead. That's what we have learned from today. But look, in rounds 4 and 5, at the end of the day, situation over everything. What situation they're in, at what point do you think they could produce? That's what really matters. All right, you guys staying with me? I know this is a lot of information, and I hope I'm presenting it well. This is a big project that I took on. Do me a huge favor, smash that like button if you're enjoying what I'm talking about. And also, if you want to support this channel, get a Dynasty team review from us, get the 2024 rookie report from us, then use a promo code LAND, become a Mother Flocker member, and you're going to get so many perks in return as a thank you from us for supporting the show. Shall we move on to wide receivers? Where do top 12 and top 24 finishes come from for wide receivers? Why that number? Again, top 12 in a 12-man league would be a wide receiver 1. right? And if we're talking top 24, those are your wide receiver 2 finishes. So what we're first going to look at is the last 5 years for top 12 wide receiver finishes. Okay, in the last 5 years, 60% of wide receivers who finished top 12 came from either rounds 1 or 2. And oddly enough, round 5 in the last 5 years has had more top 12 finishes than round 4. Round 4 has an abysmal top 12 rate. I mean, 3.3% in the last 5 years, top 12 finishes have come from round 4. For whatever reason, round 4 is not a good place to bet on a wide receiver. In fact, it feels like a landmine waiting to happen based off what we've seen in the last 5 years. But also, if we expand that to the last 10 years, look at that. 2.5% of top 12 finishes in the last decade have come from round 4. Round 4 is not a spot I think we want to be targeting wide receivers. Now, I'm not going to say that's a blanket statement because this wide receiver class is so deep. There will probably be players that I like in round 4 this year. But in general, history tells us it's not a very good bet. At least the numbers tell us it's not a very good bet. In fact, round 5 has a much higher percentage hit rate in top 12 wide receivers than round 4 does. You know, almost 13% more, which is a big, big difference. And also, if you look at rounds 4 to 7, in the last 5 years, we're only accounting for 23% of top 12 finishes. So yes, in general, the big dogs come from round 1 and round 2. You often hear that, but maybe you have never actually seen it in this sort of research. So I'm hoping that this is helpful because again, whole point of this video is you guys always hear us say draft capital is so important, so important, so important. And people are now saying like, well, Puka Nacua, well, you know, Tank Dell, these guys didn't go high. No, draft capital is not important. It's like, well, it is, guys, but there will always be outliers. We'll talk about some outliers historically here in a second as well. Why don't we look at top 12 finishes for the past 10 years? In the past 10 years, 64% of top 12 finishes have come from rounds 1 or rounds 2. And round one, accounting for 38% of those top 12 finishes. Very, very impressive number from round 1. Obviously, those are where the big dogs in fantasy typically come from. There are outliers, but typically those round 1 guys are pretty dominant. And again, I don't want to shit on round 4. That's not what I'm trying to do. But what if I told you that that undrafted free agents in the past decade, we've had more top 12 finishes from undrafted free agents than we have from round 4? Well, that is just true. It is the facts. It has happened. Your Adam Thielens, your Doug Baldwins, your Robbie Andersons, all those guys have played a part to that being the case. All right, why don't we dive into the top 24 finishes of the last 10 years. So in the last 10 years, 38% of top 24 finishes come from round 1 wide receivers, and 64% of top 24 finishes come from rounds 1 to 2 out of the wide receiver position. So again, those rounds 1 and 2, those guys have been absolutely dominating. Round 4 has been so bad. Again, 1.4%. I don't know what the bad juju is about round 4, but it's been so bad over the last 10 years for top 24 finishes. At just 1.7% is the lowest amount of top 24 finishes in the last 10 years, worse than rounds 5, 6, 7, and undrafted free agents. What is going on with round 4? I mean, the last 10 years, it has been an awful bet to get a round 4 wide receiver on your rookie teams. It's just really never paid off, unfortunately. But look, outliers are inevitable. We've had some huge outliers in the past 10 years. You know, guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a round 4 pick, he is really the only reason round 4 is hanging in there at all. Like, he is single-handedly the only reason round 4 is not at 0%. Genuinely. For the past 3 years, he's been a top 21 finish. For the past 2, it's been much higher. Tyreek Hill is a round 5 outlier, 6 years in the top 10. Stephon Diggs, a round 5 outlier, 7 years in the top 24. You've got names like Antonio Brown, who was a wide receiver 1 like 4 years in a row out of round 6. That's what we call an outlier. Julian Edelman, top 20 in 4 years as a round 7 guy. That's what we call an outlier. Adam Thielen, 4 years in the top 17 as an undrafted free agent. That is what we call an outlier. You cannot chase those, but it doesn't mean that those won't happen. And the last thing I wanted to point out is this is time to give Mike Evans his flowers. Right here, right now, it is time to give Mike Evans his flowers. He is the only player that had a top 24 finish 10 years in a row at the wide receiver spot. 10 years in a row, Mike Evans had a top 24 finish. And where did he come from? He came from round 1. We know that pedigree is important for our wide receivers. All right, you guys hanging in with me? There is so much information that we are digesting together. I hope that this was a good way to do it. I really don't know, but I hope it was a good way to do it. I thought it was interesting. Maybe you guys don't, but maybe you do. Let's move on to tight ends. Where do top 12 finishes come for the tight end position? Where do those come from? Let's find out together. Well, tight end's a little bit weird because you're going to see round 2 tight ends are actually what dominates top 12 finishes. In the past 5 years, 30% have accounted out of round 2. 27.5% in the last 10 years. Now, what do we take away from that information? Does that mean that round 1 wide receivers or tight ends, are not good? No, that is more a reflection of not many tight ends going in round 1 in the last 10 years. Very often we see round 2, round 3, round 4 is where NFL teams are trying to address the tight end position. That is because of positional value. It's just not a position that typically goes in round 1. Now, does that mean if Brock Bowers goes in round 1, we shouldn't take him in our rookie drafts? No, again, he's just a rare talent. It's not often that this position goes in round 1. Round 1 accounted for just 20% of top 12 finishes in the last 5 years. Just 20%. Whereas rounds 2 and 3 both accounted for more top 12 finishes in the past 5 years. Together, they accounted for 51.7% of those top 12 finishes. And weirdly enough, undrafted free agents in the past 5 years have accounted for more top 12 finishes than rounds 6 and 7 combined. Strange, but I have a theory because oftentimes if we look at the last, round 6, 7 versus undrafted free agents, we're seeing a lot of undrafted free agents outperform round 6 and 7. And I have a theory why, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if we look at the last 10 years as a whole, we can see again, rounds 2 and 3 are dominating top 12 finishes. So how do we evaluate draft capital when it comes to tight ends? Well, we should be aware that very good tight ends come from rounds 2 and 3. So your guys like Trey McBride, you should not devalue Trey McBride in Dynasty because he didn't go in round 1 like Dalton Kincaid. He didn't go in round 1 like Kyle Pitts. No, that's ridiculous. But these numbers also don't tell us to devalue round 1 tight ends. We just know that it's not often that those tight ends are available in the NFL. They just don't go in round 1 very often. Rounds 2 to 3 in the last 10 years have accounted for 54% of top 12 finishes. Now, the question that we do have to ask ourselves is, should we draft a round 1 tight end over a round 1 quarterback or wide receiver or running back? You have to make that call for yourself. But for me in general, I probably would actually lean quarterback, wide receiver, and running back over a round 1 tight end, regardless of how much I love that player. Now, there are, of course, at every position outliers. George Kittle is probably one of the best outliers at the tight end position. Kittle went in round 5, and he's been a top 5 tight end for 5 years in the past decade. Delaney Walker, a top 8 finish for 4 years in the last decade, coming out around 6. Darren Waller had 2 good years. Antonio Gates, undrafted free agent for the Chargers. He had a lot of great years there. And then Taysom Hill, a top 12 finish in the past 2 or 3 seasons, actually, which is quite funny. So we've talked about quarterbacks, we talked about running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. We know what round those top 12 and top 24 finishes come from. Hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully you can, digest this information and it will be useful for you in your rookie drafts. But what I wanted to do is, why don't we find out across all positions? What if we looked at top 12 finishes across every single position for the past 5 years? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Where do top 12 finishes come from across those positions for the last 5 years? Well, round one is absolutely dominating all positions in top 12 finishes. 40%. 96 of 240 players have come from round one. And of course, round two will be the next at 22.1%. We see a huge drop off in rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7. And oddly enough, you guys might have remembered I said this a couple minutes ago when we were looking at the tight ends, but undrafted free agents account for more percentage than round 6 and 7 across all positions in the last 5 years. And I have a theory as to why. You draft a guy in round 6 and round 7, he's obviously determined to prove that you were wrong. But if a player goes undrafted, typically that is where those gems are found. These guys from, no-name schools that are very good players, but no one really knows about them. They have that extra chip on their shoulder to say, I was undrafted. But watch me prove every single one of these teams wrong. I don't know, just my theory. But as weird as it sounds, the last 5 years, the last 10 years have told us that we should maybe bet on undrafted free agents more than we bet on round 6 and 7 players. I could be wrong, but that is what the last 10 years have told us historically. But guys, what do you think about this video? It is so different to anything I've ever done. I think there is so much information, but I just don't know if I presented it in a good way or not. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. A lot of percentages, a lot of top 12 and accounted for and all that nonsense, but I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll talk to you soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.